Hey guys! Welcome to Social Studies with Miss Rogers World History Edition. In our previous class, we ended the Middle Ages, a time period typically known as the Age of Faith, the Age of Feudalism, and the Dark Ages. We really saw where the Middle Ages got the name the Dark Ages in the late Middle Ages, when we have some crazy events like the 100 Years' War, the Great Schism, and the Black Death. These events will really change Europe, and these changes will lead to a time period known as the Renaissance. The Renaissance will start in Italy, and of course, Renaissance ideas will eventually spread to the rest of Europe, creating what we will consider the Northern Renaissance. But today, we're focusing on the Italian Renaissance. So, let's get started. As we just talked about, the Middle Ages was full of death and destruction, especially in Europe. We talked in the late Middle Ages about how those who survived are going to develop a new outlook on life. Obviously, there will be those grieving and mourning, succumbing to the gloominess of the Dark Ages, but others will have a new appreciation for life. They will be so thankful that they survived. It will almost be seen like a second chance to do better. Many people want to celebrate this, and overall, these new outlooks on life changed how society worked. This change in Europe became known as the Renaissance. Renaissance means revival or rebirth, and it really stands for the revival of culture. Scholars during this time thought back to the art, the culture, and the literature of the Middle Ages and rolled their eyes. The lack of education in culture, wow. What a dark time. This type of self-reflection made society remember a brighter time, a more cultured time, the peak of ancient Greece and Rome. It was these ancient empires that those alive during the Renaissance will use as inspiration to change the world around themselves. The three big characteristics of the Renaissance are: 1. Italy emerged with powerful and culturally rich city-states, especially city-states such as Florence, Venice, and Milan. 2. A new view on human individuality and value becomes incredibly popular. And 3. The Renaissance was seen as like an age of recovery from the mess that was the Middle Ages, and society seems to want to recover through tapping into their classical roots of Greek and Roman greatness. Italy became the kickstart and center of the Renaissance for many reasons. For starters, the European world started specializing their agriculture, meaning they focused on creating goods that naturally thrived in their climates. Italian city-states specialized goods as well, and they were thriving. Italian cities were more urban than the rest of rural Europe, meaning there were more cities with prosperous trade centers. We remember that one of the main outcomes of the Crusades was that it stimulated trade between Europe and the Middle East. With Italy being the main trade port between Asia and the rest of Europe, it meant that Italian cities were just that much more profitable. The biggest player in the trade game was Venice. Venice was right on the coast of the Mediterranean and right by the borders of the Islamic Empire. Their location gave them the perfect opportunity to be the trade powerhouse of Europe, and they specialized in shipbuilding. Milan's specialty was agriculture and silk and weapons, while Florence was huge in banking, but more on that in a second. As we've gone through world history, typically merchants have been towards the bottom of the social totem pole, but that's not the case during the Renaissance. After the catastrophes of the Middle Ages and the population decreases, labor and goods become high in demand but low in supply, meaning that merchants and laborers are able to ask for higher prices. Throughout our class, those in power like lords typically inherited their wealth, but merchants did not agree with that system. Merchants thought people should earn their wealth, earn their power. Merchants had a huge role in politics, and they believed they earned that place. Many Italian city-states tried a republic form of government, just like the ancient Romans, but not all of the city-states meshed well with that form of government. Fun fact, governments are not one size fits all. The success of a government depends on the culture and attitude of the society it's governing. Whether we're talking about how republics worked for some city-states and not others during the Renaissance, or even in modern times, just because a type of government works well for one area does not mean it will work well for another. A society's culture will determine if the style of government works or not. Some city-states had merchant families so powerful that those families ruled the city-state, like Florence. Florence was a city-state ruled by the Medici family, the family responsible for all of the successful banks throughout Florence. Cosimo de' Medici did not hold office himself, but controlled those in government positions through loans at the bank. This was all super under the table, so Florence could still appear to have a republic, but they definitely did not. Maybe they were more like ancient Rome than they realized. Empire, but not an empire, please. When Cosimo died, he passed this sort of dictatorship to his grandson Lorenzo, who would be known as Lorenzo the Magnificent. That is a fabulous name. I have no idea why my own students don't give me some type of fancy name like that. What gives, you guys? The point is, these merchants really meant business. I mean, we've never seen a merchant class so powerful before. And it's weird for kings in the church as well to think such commonly born people are so wealthy and so powerful. But it's also hard for people like the church officials to complain when merchants are spending so much money on things like church buildings. Seriously, what room do they have to complain? One last reason that Italy is such a big fish in this idea of a revival of culture is because the whole inspiration of ancient Greece and ancient Rome is right under their feet. We know ancient Rome borrowed heavily from the ancient Greeks, and the ruins from ancient Rome are still around. Not only that, but those in the Italian peninsula have a unique access to Greek and Roman manuscripts, and there are two reasons for this. First of all, you have the Catholic monasteries in Rome. A monastery is a community of monks living together under religious vows. If you remember the Roman Catholic Church, originally it was the church Peter found back in the day. It was a part of the Roman Empire, meaning these monasteries would have records from ancient Greece and ancient Rome. Now, are all of the old records that the Christian church once had on Greece and Rome in Roman monasteries? No. I mean, obviously, I'm sure so many records got lost during the sack of Rome, or during the 1,000 years that was the Middle Ages, and on top of that, remember the Roman Empire had two big churches back in the day. One in the Western Empire, Rome, and the other in the Eastern Empire, Constantinople, which Constantinople held strong until very recently in our history. We saw at the end of the Crusades in the Middle Ages, the Byzantines were struggling. And towards the end of the Middle Ages, the Islamic Empire finishes them off. But luckily for Europe and the Renaissance, many Christians from Constantinople flee to the Italian peninsula and take some of those records with them. Boom, there we go. So Roman monasteries and Constantinople monasteries provide Italy with manuscripts from ancient Greece and ancient Rome, thus letting the people base this new society off of Roman and Greek culture as best as they can. One of the largest areas of inspiration that Greek and Roman culture gave to the Renaissance was art. One example of this would be sculptures and statues. We know today that the white sculptures and statues that existed in ancient Rome and Greece were not white. They were colored. After thousands of years of sitting in the sun, the color just faded and showed the white marble. But those in the Renaissance had no idea. None of them were alive in the ancient era, so they thought the ancient Greeks and Romans made pure white statues, and that became the style of the Renaissance. Now, the main difference between classical culture and the Renaissance culture was the focus on humanism. Humanism is the idea that people are more than just a part of a group. They're individuals with individual thoughts, individual feelings, individual goals, individual physical characteristics that make them unique, and you can really see that portrayed in not only Renaissance art, but in everyday life as well. Humanism was not just an idea in the art world, but also in society. Each person has their own wants, their own needs, and the most radical idea in humanism was the idea that, hey, maybe people can actually act on their wants and needs and still be Christians and not offend God. Previously in the Middle Ages, people's entire identities were wrapped around the idea of being Catholic and as pure and pious as possible. But individuals in the Renaissance started thinking, so many people did it right and they still suffered in the Middle Ages. So maybe I can still be Christian but also live my life. And when they said live my life, they meant something as simple as taking up a hobby that might not have had anything to do with Christianity, just because it was something fun they wanted to do. This led a lot of people, including merchants, to pick up artistic hobbies, where we practiced humanism by painting because we actually enjoyed it, and painted with humanism by not editing out the weird shape of that person's nose in our painting because that's who they are and that physical feature makes them them. Not hiding their mole in this picture because it makes them unique. That is putting humanism into art. Not editing out what people would consider their flaws, but highlighting what makes them different, what makes them their own human. That's humanism. The idea of humanism brought about new educational subjects like history, literature, philosophy, subjects we now call the humanities. And the idea of a broad education became so important that it even changed the idea of a man's role in society. A successful man was considered a Renaissance man, someone who mastered many areas of study, and even women in the Renaissance were more educated now than women in the Middle Ages. All of this happened on top of humanism having such a profound effect on the artistic world. It made art so different, so personalized. And now we're even going to have a new reliance system. In the Middle Ages, we saw in feudalism how different social classes relied on each other. And we're going to have something similar in the art world. Art during the Renaissance becomes something of status, and that's true in modern times as well. Fancy people own fancy art, and this really starts in the Renaissance. The more expensive art you own, the fancier you are. So many wealthy people, including merchants, kings, the church, they would become patrons of the art, meaning they would financially fund artists. They wanted to not only own fancy art, but also wanted to beautify their communities, beautify Europe after, the Middle Ages. Patrons of the art would spend all of this money on art and architecture, and artists would need this income to make a living and to create this art, to give these socialites the status they want so badly. And these groups would kind of socially and economically need each other. The artists cannot create without the funding from the patrons, and the patrons need this social boost because all fancy people compete to be the fanciest of all. That's just how fancy people work. Fun fact, you always hear in class, during the Renaissance, the world was beautified to make up for how cringy the Middle Ages was. And that sounds great, but even I didn't really get the magnitude of, hey, look at these masterpieces, until I actually went to Florence myself and saw with my own eyes, this is the, hey, we're gonna beautify Europe kind of thing we're talking about. Wow, is this impressive. I mean, look at this. I mean, even my pictures don't do it justice. In addition to humanism, artists are also going to adopt a technique called perspective, which is painting a three-dimensional illustration on a two-dimensional surface, kind of like this. And it's beautiful and so cool. I will never in a million years be talented enough to do something like this. And the kids who had me before, well, just ask them about my art skills. Do it. They will never forget. It's my thing. I love drawing on the board. Am I good at it? Well, moving on. You can simply remember some of the most famous artists of the Renaissance just by watching the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles show. Does anyone even still watch that anymore? Is that a year old joke at my own expense? Please don't tell me if it is. Just let me live on blissfully. You have Donatello, who made the famous David statue in the white marble that he didn't know was supposed to be colored. But all jokes aside, this really is freaking amazing. Raphael helped construct and paint St. Peter's Basilica that still stands today, the most glorious building I have ever and will ever stumble upon. Have I seen the whole world? No, but I still stand by that statement. I'm not even Catholic, and I was mesmerized by the magnificence of this building. St. Peter's Basilica in Vatican City is the center of the Roman Catholic Church and is said to be where St. Peter, Jesus' disciple, was buried. Fun fact, for those of you who don't know, Vatican City is a city-state that is the headquarters of the Roman Catholic Church. Vatican City is classified as the smallest country in the entire world. It's where the Pope lives, and they even have their own little army whose only job is to keep the Pope safe. One thing I didn't get to see in Rome, besides the Pantheon, that was also upsetting, was the Sistine Chapel. We were in Rome on a Sunday, and the Sistine Chapel is closed on Sundays. So who's going back to Rome just to see the Sistine Chapel one day? This lady right here. The Sistine Chapel is another huge, important part of Vatican City, and Renaissance artist Michelangelo painted the ceiling. Look at how phenomenal, and not only did he do such a great job, he painted an anatomically correct brain. There are a lot of theories about the meaning behind Michelangelo's painting, specifically the brain part. One theory is that he was such a devout Catholic, he was illustrating the creation of Adam and how God bestowed on him human intelligence. Probably the most famous Renaissance artist of all would be Leonardo da Vinci, the painter of the Mona Lisa and her eyes that follow you. Leonardo was a fabulous artist, but many don't know he was also an inventor. They definitely called him a Renaissance man, and some of his invention doodles in his notebook included parachutes, an armored tank of sorts, a diving suit. There truly is no argument that this man was not only intelligent, but extremely talented. As the Renaissance also focused on learning and education, since the Middle Ages had a major lack thereof, one area that educational reforms promoted was grammar and the correct use of language. And by language we mean Latin because, going back to Roman roots. And this brings us to Dante, the author of Dante's Inferno, the Divine Comedy. There are people who argue about when the Renaissance really started. So some could argue that Dante technically wrote his book in the late Middle Ages, but regardless, his work would become super popular in the Renaissance. Dante's Divine Comedy is basically a tour of the 9 circles of hell. And the way he describes hell is really where people both in the Renaissance and even in modern days get the image of hell, the underworld, Satan himself. He'll not only influence painters to illustrate his work for ages, but will also influence writers as well. Dante wrote in vernacular, meaning he wrote in his native tongue. Now listen, vernacular is not a specific language. There is a proper language of the Renaissance, which is Latin, and then there's vernacular, which is just whatever someone's original home language was. It was considered informal to not publish things in Latin, but he did anyways. Go Dante, paving the way for casual reading. And many authors will take after him. One famous author down the road is Niccolo Machiavelli. Machiavelli wrote about ideas people still argue about today. Machiavelli wrote The Prince, which is pretty much a guidebook for how leaders should act. He talks about how a leader should take power and how he should make sure to keep it away from his enemies. He questions whether a leader should be more liked or more feared. Should a leader be honest or should they be effective? Machiavelli argues that a prince must not only mislead his people and lie to his opponents, but must be sly enough to not get caught doing it. He says that is the only way for a prince to truly lead effectively. What do you think? All of these influencers in the Renaissance have such a large impact on culture, and they're still talked about and discussed in modern times. Towards the end of the 15th century, Renaissance ideas will spread north of Italy, creating something called the Northern Renaissance. The Northern Renaissance will be a little bit different than the Italian Renaissance, but we'll focus more on that next class. Until then, I hope you guys have a really great day, and I'll see you then.